Now, from the Pope John Paul II Cultural Center in Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
Good evening. Welcome to The World Over Live. A happy Epiphany to all of you, and I trust everyone had a great Christmas and a Happy New Year. Welcome to our first show of 2011. Some huge change is underway here in Washington. The new Congress was sworn in this week. We'll discuss what you can expect from the new Speaker of the House, John Boehner, and his colleagues, and news from the White House with Kathryn Lopez of National Review Online. And while many of us were enjoying the Christmas holidays, Christians were suffering deadly attacks throughout the Middle East, Africa, and the Philippines. Dr. Walid Phares will put it in context for us and talk about his latest book, The Coming Revolution: Struggle for Freedom in the Middle East. If you have questions about any of these topics or anything on the show, call us, 1-800-221-9460 in the U.S. and internationally, 205-271-2980, or drop us an email, worldover@EWTN.com. Let's get started. Here's the brief. News from the world over this week. The holidays have been a time of tragedy and fear for Christians in many Muslim-dominated countries. In Egypt, on New Year's Day, 21 Coptic Christians were killed when a suspected jihadist detonated a bomb as worshippers left Mass. More than 80 others were injured. The blast left the exterior of the church awash in blood. It was the worst act of terrorist violence against Christians there in a decade. The faithful have since taken to the streets of Alexandria in protest against the violence, claiming that government officials are not doing enough to protect its minority population from Muslim extremists. Security was tightened, however, around churches ahead of the Orthodox celebration of Christmas this week. Last Christmas, 6 Orthodox Christians and a Muslim police officer were murdered in southern Egypt as worshipers left midnight Mass. Deadly attacks also bloodied Christmas celebrations in Nigeria and the Philippines. The December attacks at churches in Nigeria killed 32 and another 60 in subsequent reprisals. And inside a southern Filipino church, a concealed bomb was detonated during the Christmas gospel reading. Thankfully, no one was killed, but a priest and 11 faithful were injured in the blast. And in Iraq, just before the new year, coordinated attacks at 4 Christian homes killed 2 and injured another 8. Militants used a combination of grenades and bombs to send a wave of fear through the already terrified Iraqi Christian community. Earlier Thursday, police in Mosul foiled an attempted bomb attack there. 6 explosive devices and belts laden with explosives were discovered near a Chaldean Orthodox church just hours before Christmas Mass was celebrated. Al-Qaeda links are suspected in all of the attacks. And meanwhile, in Iran, state television reported Wednesday that leaders of the country's Christian minority have been arrested. According to the report, they are accusing these individuals of spreading a hardline version of their faith. The report did not elaborate other than to quote a government official who called the arrested Christians a corrupt and deviant current. He said more arrests are to come. Iran's political opposition reported on its website that 60 Christians have been arrested since the Christmas crackdown, including a priest taken into custody on Friday. More about all of this in our next segment. Back here in the United States, the new Congress has commenced, with the Republican Party now in control of the House of Representatives. The new members were sworn in on Wednesday, and Ohio Republican John Boehner officially took the reins as the new Speaker of the House. Speaker Boehner then set the tone for the new Congress.
We gather here today at a time of great challenges. And nearly 1 in 10 of our neighbors is out of work. Healthcare costs are still rising for American families. Our spending has caught up with us, and our debt soon will eclipse the entire size of our national economy. Hard work and tough decisions will be required of the 112th Congress.
Among the priorities for the GOP House is a quick repeal of the president's health care overhaul. They will vote on that matter next week. More about the year ahead in Congress and the new speaker later in the program. Pope Benedict XVI's outreach to Anglicans who desire full communion with the Catholic Church continues. 3 former Church of England bishops were received into the Catholic Church at a Westminster Cathedral Mass on New Year's Day. John Broadhurst, Andrew Burnham, and Keith Newton are laymen for the moment. But in what must be the quickest ascent of Catholic clergy in modern times, they will be ordained deacons next week, then priests 3 days later. And in short order, they're expected to be made bishops. They will likely head a new Anglican ordinariate within the Catholic Church, all in time for Lent. As stipulated by the Holy Father, the new ordinariates will allow for the reception of Anglican individuals and communities into the Catholic Church while retaining some aspects of their spirituality and tradition. Proposition 8, California's voter-backed initiative protecting marriage, has taken another legal detour. This after the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals said Tuesday that it cannot decide if the law is unconstitutional, or constitutional rather, until California's High Court rules whether the Prop 8 sponsors have legal standing to defend the measure. In August, a San Francisco judge struck down the ban as a violation of gay Californians' civil rights. Both former Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger and then Attorney General Jerry Brown took the unusual step of refusing to appeal the decision. The Ninth Circuit further suggested that without the state court's input, it would have to dismiss the case. We'll keep you posted on that one. And Pope Benedict XVI used his homily during the Epiphany Mass Thursday to make his most direct remarks yet about the origins of the universe. In short, it was no accident. The Holy Father said, quote, "The universe is not the result of chance, as some would want us to believe, but instead reflects the wisdom of the Creator, the inexhaustible creativity of God," end quote. His comments seem to be a direct response to world-renowned cosmologist Stephen Hawking, who opined in a book last year that God was not necessary to explain the Big Bang Theory. And thousands upon thousands have been made the pilgrimage to the Western Wall in Jerusalem to offer their prayers in the form of written petitions stuffed in the cracks and crevices of the 100-foot stone wall. 2 popes have even made such a pilgrimage, but now there's an app for that. Thanks to the Western Wall Heritage Foundation, iPhone users can now visit Judaism's holiest prayer site from anywhere in the world at any time via a live video stream. Users can also write a prayer onto their iPhone that will then be placed in the crevices of the old wall, as is Jewish custom. And speaking of petitions, the world over may be looking for a new home shortly. The John Paul II Center, where we've been broadcasting for a couple of years now, is being sold, and our fate here is uncertain. So we ask your prayers, and if you know of any spaces available in the D.C. area, let us know. We're world over at EWTN.com, and we'll let you know where we end up. In the short term, if you're planning a trip to D.C., why not attend the World Over live Thursdays at 8 p.m.? Drop us an email at worldoverdc@yahoo.com, and we'll reserve a seat for you. When we return, Dr. Walid Phares returns to talk about the rise of anti-Christian violence in the Middle East and throughout the world, and what's driving it. The World Over Live continues in a moment. Stay with us.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Several months ago, we saw a horrific attack on a Chaldean Catholic church in Baghdad, as well as a mail bomb plot that originated in Yemen. On Christmas Eve, violence erupted in Nigeria when armed gunmen torched churches and killed at least 38 people, including a pastor. Similar horrific acts were committed in Iraq, the Philippines, and Egypt. These events seem to signal an increase in terrorism that is religiously targeted. My next guest is an expert on global jihad and Middle Eastern affairs. He's a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies and author of the new book, The Coming Revolution: Struggle for Freedom in the Middle East. Would you welcome back to the program Dr. Walid Phares? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Walid, let's start with a general overview here. Is this a war on Christians in the Middle East and around the world, it seems?
Look, in your introduction, it was very clear. This is a global jihad against the Christian population in the Middle East. We're talking about 25 million people stretching from Iran down to Sudan through Syria, Lebanon, and Egypt. And what we have been seeing over the past 2 years, and now increasingly in an escalating fashion, specific terrorist attacks against Christian communities, the weakest ones. That would be Iraq, as we saw, you mentioned, or the Copts of Egypt. But there are other attacks.
The Copts of Egypt, this is 10% of the population, Walid. I mean, I've been there. I'm sure you've been there. You've witnessed this. I mean, this is a pretty vibrant part of that society, the Coptic Christians.
We're talking about a population between 12 million to 15 million. That is 3 times the size of the entire Palestinian population. There are more Christians in one neighborhood of Cairo than Palestinians living in Gaza, 1.5 million people. And yet this population has been submitted, not only for the last few weeks, but for a few decades and years to, on the one hand, attacks, security attacks, but also political persecution.
Now, I mean, this attack in Alexandria was awful. 121 killed, 100 injured, and the community there's up in arms. I mean, they are marching at least. What do you see in your book, The Coming Revolution? You talk about a problem of identification. What does that mean?
It means that these pre-Arab, pre-Islamic population, these are the Indians of the Middle East. These are those native populations. The Copts are the descendants of the people who built the pyramids. These are the Copts. The Assyro-Chaldean Syriac Christians in Iraq are the descendants of the original Aramaic-speaking population. Lebanese Christians are descending from the Phoenicians. We're talking about the native population which has been submitted to persecution and also now violence by the jihadists because of the jihadi ideology that does not want to identify them as such. So it's an issue of identity, in addition to the fact that you have politics and agendas.
In Egypt and even maybe in Iraq, are we dealing also with not only religious differences, but more cultural differences?
Well, the Copts are the ethnic, original, native population of Egypt. The totalitarian ideologies, Arab nationalism in the past under Nasser, today's jihadist movements, what are they claiming? That this whole land is Arab Islamic, quote unquote, of course, and they are acting in a way that is totalitarian. They do not accept the other. They do not accept the idea that it's multi-ethnic, and thus they put pressure on the Copts.
Let's talk for a moment about what we saw in Iraq. On January 2nd, 2 people dead, 13 wounded. And these were bombs placed at individual homes where they obviously knew a Christian population and a Christian family lived. What is the intent there?
Oh, the intent was very clear, Raymond. We discussed it over the past year. Al-Qaeda issued press releases, so it's not just we're guessing. There are ideologues in the region who appear on satellites, Arab satellites, who are inciting for attacks and violence and other activities against the Christian communities, and Al-Qaeda issued a press release, and now those who are carrying out these activities are the local Salafists, local jihadists in Iraq, in Egypt, and other places in the Middle East.
Do you see this as a genocide, as the former Lebanese president mentioned the other day?
Well, this is basically the beginning of what could become a massive ethnic cleansing of the Christians in the Middle East. Let's remember, and a few days from the referendum in southern Sudan, that 1 million black Christians have been killed in Sudan over the past 25 years. That is genocide. And black Muslims in Darfur have been killed also in high numbers. That is a genocide. So what's happening now is an intimidation of the Christian communities or of moderate Muslim communities to either accept the diktat of the jihadists or leave.
If you have a question, you can email us worldover@EWTN.com. The phone number, 1-800-221-9460. And you folks watching internationally, 205-271-2727. 2980. Dr. Phares, I want to talk about the book for a moment, The Coming Revolution. In it, you make the suggestion that the 9/11 Commission suggested that all of this war with terrorism, was a failure of imagination. You say, no, this is a failure of education. Why?
Of education. I was on the last pre-briefing at that commission in a conference, and the commissioners made the case that we can't fathom what happened. We were not prepared for that. And I counter-argued, and I said, no, the American public was not educated about it. We have been submitted, as Americans and as Westerners in general terms, to an ongoing jihadi campaign from the end of the Cold War throughout the 90s. We had the 1993 first attempt in New York. Then we had the rise of the Taliban, Kubar, 95, 96, first attacks in East Africa, 98, the call, and then 9/11. So, yes, we have been prepared. We have not been educated about the existence of an ideology, the jihadists.
And you distinguish, and you did it last time you were on the program, and we got a lot of email about it. You distinguish between an Orthodox Islam, if you will, someone practicing an Islamic faith, and this politicized Islam.
Let me put
What's the difference?
In the framework, very simple. You have a community, the Muslims. Within the community, you have hardliners, like the German people, the National Socialists. You have all sorts of political parties. The jihadists are those who are using stipulations from faith, from Islam, and then enforcing a return to what they believe is the caliphate. It's like today in Christianity, we'd have an extremist force that wants to bring us back to everything which was before the Vatican Council, before reformations and everything else, and establish an empire. That's what they're trying to do.
You talk in the book, The Coming Revolution, I mean, this is about the struggle in the region. Walid, the struggle, it seems to me, the coming revolution, if you look at the young throughout this region, they are all embracing this hard-line ideology. That's where the passion is. That's where the fire is in these communities. What confidence do you have that these fledgling democratic groups, if there are such a thing in some of these communities, can emerge and rise to the top of these societies?
My friend, I am just counter-arguing. I am saying over the past many years, including myself, I have published 3 books on future jihad, on how fast and wide the jihadists are recruiting all these young people. We see them on email, and Facebook, YouTube, everything. But now I'm saying, look at the other map. 1.5 million Iranians demonstrating in the downtown of Tehran. What is that? 60% of them are women. Majority of the demonstrators are kids, young people under 18 of age. 5 years before, 1.5 million people demonstrated in downtown Beirut for the Cedars Revolution. Youth are on Facebook. Even within Saudi Arabia, there is a counter-movement to the jihadists. It is a democratic revolution. Unfortunately, we are not recognizing it. Unfortunately, when the demonstrators were in the streets of Tehran, what did Washington say? What did the administration say? Oh, we don't meddle in those issues. Imagine that Reagan would have said that about Lech Walesa or Václav Havel or the dissidents. So it's all about Washington more than the Middle East.
Well, that plays right into Nicholas's question here, which just came in. He writes, is the UN or the United States doing anything about this? Is anyone from the UN or the State Department condemning these actions? Now, the president said something this week. What did he say?
Well, the administration is condemning. When there is violence, there is no doubt about it. But the issue is they are not condemning actually the ideology behind that violence. We were very good at saying, well, Nazism is responsible for what has happened in World War II and the Holocaust. The Bolsheviks were, were responsible for the persecution of people.
Identifying who this enemy is.
Identifying the ideology and the enemy. Instead, first of all, we're not talking about the ideology. And 2, we're going to sit down with the Taliban and find the good guys among the Taliban. We're going to find the moderates and Hezbollah. I mean, what are we talking about? Who are we fooling? The world knows, young people in the Middle East knows that the jihadists are the threat.
Now, what about the culture in place? And I hear this all the time, that the culture of the Muslim world is such, it will never embrace democracy. It is simply not in the DNA, if you will. You make a different argument in this book.
Absolutely. Actually, the academic elites in the West have an interest in saying, we can't change anything. It's going to stay the same. Why? Because these academic elites are actually funded or partially funded by petrodollars. The elites in the region have no interest in having us being convinced that the democratic revolution can happen in the Middle East. And therefore, I argue in the book that basically, like any other society, those who have the microphone, Muslim Brotherhood, Taliban, the authoritarian regime, they are the ones who are speaking on behalf of the region. Those who do not have the microphone are a silent majority. I am interested in the minority of activists, those who are the dissidents, democracy forces, women, students, artists, cab drivers.
And where are those democratic forces most emergent at this moment?
The spots basically are very clear. The largest one is in Iran. The green movement in Iran is what we have to be looking at. The second, the Syrian revolution of Lebanon. Sudan, in a few days, we're going to have a new
huge
homeland,
referendum.
free country, which is going to exist. That reminds me of Estonia and the Baltics when they left the Soviet Union, leaving a domino effect. Even as far as North Africa, the Kabyle population, 8 million in North Algeria, they are also calling for autonomy and freedom. So I see the two maps. I see the jihadists on the one hand on the rise, and I see the civil society rising. It's up to us to make a decision with whom we're going to partner.
When you look at Iran and you see this week 60 Christian leaders plus, could be as many as 200, arrested, doesn't that run counter to the argument when you have this totalitarian group sort of rounding up any dissidents? Doesn't that dilute and weaken the expression from that sector of society?
Well, we had cases before in World War II under the Nazis, during the Cold War under the Bolsheviks. What did these authoritarian regimes do? They targeted the weakest, the Jews, the Catholics at some point, and many other minorities. At the end of the day, that led to what? We had Budapest, it was crushed. We had Prague, it was crushed. We had, Poland. At the end of the day, the whole system collapsed. But it needs the support of those who are free on the outside of us. We need basically to stand by and partner with these forces.
If we learned anything from this whole WikiLeaks explosion of data over the last few weeks, it was that the Saudis, Saudi Arabia, has been dumping an enormous amount of money into so many of these jihadist movements around the world. What is the lesson there? And do you have these democratic dissidents just below the surface in a place like Saudi Arabia, a very repressive ally of the United States?
Let me just use your term of WikiLeaks. I would call it the mega leaks. This was really the item which is a mega leak because it showed very clearly not only that the Wahhabis and the petrodollars are behind the propagation of this ideology.
And it's got very little coverage.
Yes, but it also shows that we knew about it, that our diplomats knew about it. I mean, there is something awkward here. On the one hand, our administration and bureaucrats knew that this was happening. On the other hand, they didn't want to even recognize that there is an ideology. How come in your WikiLeaks we know that?
We see your memos, yeah.
Absolutely. Now, what is now being transpiring through internet, through websites such as elaf.com and others, is even inside Saudi Arabia, even below the level of the Wahhabis, you have dissidents. You have people who are opposing this. The difference is, are we seeing them?
I want to go to the phones. Rachel from Michigan, you're on the world over. What's your question, Rachel?
Yes, hi. I'm of Chaldean descent. First of all, thank you for putting me on the air and allowing me to ask this question. I'm of Chaldean descent, and my family were from Iraq. And right now, in today's, the Christians of Iraq, the Chaldeans that are being persecuted and having to flee the country, do you believe that the government/police of Iraq is giving a blind eye to this and allowing this to happen, or just, turning the other cheek? What's your impact? Does this country fall under, like, a convention against torture type country?
Well, that's a fascinating question. Actually, the answer is coming from the news. Now, there is the return of Muqtada al-Sadr, of the Iranian-backed militia. Obviously, he is not going to impose democracy. He's going to impose the Iranian model. And there is the return of al-Qaeda to the center of Iraq. Chaldeans themselves and Assyrians and the other Christians are telling us through their NGOs that the government could do more, could do better. And unfortunately, we have spent so much money and lives and sacrifices. We have not done enough for the weakest segment of society, not just the Kurds, but the Christian communities as well.
Where was the blind spot on this, Walid? I mean, we have talked about this now for years, and Nina Shea has sat on this program, and so many people who were part of the entire religious freedom, the president's religious freedom panel at the State Department, they have been ringing, Leonard Leo and others, ringing this alarm all these years. The Bush administration turned a deaf ear to it, and this administration is doing the same. Why?
See, under the Bush administration, you had a good narrative on the top. We all heard and saw the speeches. They were clear on the issue. On the lower level of the NGOs, meaning the Christian Middle Eastern Americans and others, and the think tanks, they've done their job as much as they could. It is in the middle. The bureaucracy under the Bush administration is the same as today, as the same as 20 years ago. The bureaucracy basically caters to the influence of petrodollars. It has not really changed. So we need to have a change actually inside our bureaucracy so that a new generation of researchers, of analysts would understand the issue and then help the administration to work on this issue.
The Pope this week condemned, obviously, all of these attacks on Christians. He called it a strategy of violence. Is that a correct interpretation?
Actually, he used the absolute right word in terms of strategy. I used to call it the jihadi strategy, obviously, meaning what we are seeing is not just an incident or an accident or
But these are not isolated incidents.
No, this is a web, strategic web, which is very clear to see. You have the ideology, then you have the strategies, and then you have the various organizations, and you can even see the way the Salafists of Al-Qaeda, Taliban, and others are operating, and then the Iranians just gave us examples. But these are two different species, and yet they are concentrating, converging on ethnic cleansing the Christians out of the Middle East.
Where is this administration? Have they done enough? And what are you hearing from those officials in the State Department at this time?
Well, first of all, the president went to Cairo and, delivered that speech. And in that speech, he mentioned the Copts and he mentioned the Maronites of Lebanon. But at the same time, he did not mention where's the threat coming from. He did not mention the jihadists. His experts on terrorism in this administration issued a memo. Remember, last year, a memo saying, we do not treat it as a war on terror. This is not an ideology. We don't even use the terms of jihad and Islamism and Salafism and Khomainism. So how do you want the analysts in government to be able to figure out
what it is? Yeah. As everybody's a brother and sister. Well, then you can't distinguish.
If you don't have a doctrine, you can't have a policy. That's the issue.
Let's go to the phones again. Lila, you're on the phones from New York. Where are you calling?
Yes.
Tell me your background. What's your question?
Well, first, my background, I'm a Lebanese American, born in Egypt. And I wanted to thank you. And I am not only going to buy one book, I am going to buy several books and send them to my family and to other Christians. My background, we are Melkites, born in Egypt, of Lebanese heritage. And, of course, we left in the 50s like many Christians because our parents were, obviously there was persecution, underhanded. I think Mr. Phares is describing it very well. He's right on the however you say it. He hits it. I mean, he's really, it's perfect.
What is your question?
So I don't have to talk.
No, you just wanted to make a comment. Well,
I would like to say thank you, and I'm not only going to buy one book, I'm going to buy many books, but I also want to know what can we do as Eastern Rite besides prayer, besides attending our churches, besides, by the way, my name spells Leila, besides, what can we concretely do?
Okay, go ahead, Walid.
You could do a lot, Leila, and I know that you are someone who knows the issue. Your family came from there. You know the languages. What you can do, first of all, is in your own community, in the church, is to mobilize for this issue, to form a special task force, even at a very small local level, and then interact with other communities in Detroit, in Chicago, in Los Angeles. And because we have internet, you can even interact with Christian communities in the Middle East. That is the most important thing to do. And then, of course, influence the press, the local media, appear more and write to your legislators. We have a Congress today, more than any other day, who could be very sympathetic and solidarity with the issue.
That was going to be my next question. What are you hearing from this Congress? How receptive are they to the things you've been saying and reporting?
Well, we know many of the names who are in this Congress, who have been in the past seniors, veterans of the struggle for freedom for everybody in the Middle East, and specifically for the weakest, that would be the Christian minorities. They are going to be having positions of leadership. We hope that the communities are crucial. What Leila has said is very important. If you don't have witnesses, you can't carry action. Look what happened with every other different ethnic communities. Because they were organized, the legislators will help you, and both of you could be working with the administration, with this administration or with the next administration.
Interesting. What do you make of this situation in the Philippines, where this bomb went off? I mean, there's also a struggle that isn't often reported with this Muslim minority that is there increasingly growing and inflicting its will upon the Christians there.
Not that different from the other, I call them the battlefields of jihadists in South Asia, in the sense that you have the southern Muslim community in the Philippines and Mindanao, but then within that community, still the same game. you have those jihadists, Salafi, Takfiri, you have the Abu Sayyaf faction, which is the representative of Al-Qaeda in a sense, and you have larger militias all together are working to do two things. Number one, to seize the community in the south. Number two, to intimidate and ethnic cleanse the Christians from the south into the north, and to coordinate. Actually, you may see some of those working with Al-Qaeda in other battlefields, in other places around the world. So that's another battlefield.
I want to go to the phones again. Peter from New Jersey, you're on the World Over Live. What's your question, Pete?
Hi. My question is to the gentleman. I'm an Italian-American, devout Catholic, but my wife is Syrian, and she's also devout Catholic, but a Syrian who was born in the United States. What is the threat to Syrian Catholics in Syria? I'll hang up and I'll enjoy your response. God bless both of you, gentlemen.
Thank you. Walid?
Well, Syria is ruled by a Ba'athist regime, and the Ba'athist regime oppresses all Syrians, not just the Christians. But if you ask the Syria Christians, including Catholics and Orthodox, they will tell you that the first victim of this oppression has been the language. I mean, the Christians of Syria used to speak the language of Jesus. Aramaic. That's what the Arabists of the Baathists have been eliminating. And of course, you would see a lot of those activist Christian Syrians in the jails of the Ba'ath regime.
So sad. Dr. Phares, thank you as always. Enlightening and interesting. Dr. Walid Phares' new book, The Coming Revolution, Struggle for Freedom in the Middle East, is available online and at bookstores everywhere. It's a great book and really an interesting read about the future and what's coming. When we return, National Review's Kathryn Lopez is here to discuss the 112th Congress, their plans, and their new approach. The World Over Live continues in a moment. Stay right there. Thanks again.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to the World Over Live. This week, a new Congress, the 112th, was sworn in here in Washington. The Republican minority majority, they've become now, in the House of Representatives. John Boehner of Ohio took the gavel from Nancy Pelosi to become the new Speaker of the House. But what can we expect from this Congress? To discuss their agenda, the new spirit in town, and some cultural issues, we're joined by the editor-at-large at National Review Online and nationally syndicated columnist, our friend Kathryn Jean Lopez.
Hi, Raymond.
Hello, thanks for coming. Let's start talking about Boehner and this speech. A marked different tone, a marked tone change from what we've heard over the last couple of years from the former Speaker and even the administration. I'll play a little bit of this. This is John Boehner in his, I guess, introductory speech as Speaker of the House. Take a look.
In the Catholic faith, we enter into a season of service by having ashes marked on our head. The ashes remind us that life in all of its forms is very fragile. Our time on this earth, fleeting. But as the ashes are delivered, we hear those humbling words. Remember, you are dust, and to dust you shall return. The American people have humbled us. They have refreshed our memories to just how temporary the privilege of serving is. They have reminded us that everything here is on loan from them. On loan from them.
Kathryn, what do you make of this?
Raymond, you almost cut into the best part.
Yeah, that's right.
It really is worth replaying that. It was almost startling to me. I expected that he might make some reference to his humble beginnings or his Catholic faith. Yeah. He talked during the election about how he was praying every day, and not necessarily for victory, actually for guidance is what he was suggesting. Anyhow, it's a marked different tone, obviously. This is what they promised. He's actually been talking about this. This is the first time everybody was paying attention. But he's been talking about humility, learning from mistakes, and being responsible for one's actions since last February. He gave a speech at the Conservative Political Action Committee, and the marked different tone is important in a couple of ways. Obviously, first of all, Republicans have been voted out in the past, in the recent past, for hubris, among other things. This isn't a time for hubris, and I think you saw that in Boehner's speech. You saw that I was at a Marco Rubio event last night after his swearing-in event, and one thing that was striking...
The new senator in Florida, we should say.
The new Republican senator from Florida, and he was supposed to have the sort of the grandest party. Everybody went to it. Al Franken, the Democrat, former Saturday Night Live star from Minnesota, among other people, and it was actually a kind of austere event. There wasn't much there, and even Marco Rubio, is Hispanic American, family Cuban exiles, and even he said, you're not here to celebrate me. Everybody seems to be on message there. Now, of course, the question, and I imagine this might be your next question, is this for real?
Yeah, exactly. How much of this is politics? I mean, we should, just to put this in some context, this is the same week when the president attended church for the second time in a row. It's the first time that's happened. Nancy Pelosi was mentioning the scriptures just before John Boehner. Right. Then John Boehner comes and talks about his Catholic faith and the ashes. Is this everybody with an eye to 2012 worrying about that Catholic swing vote, which we know is decisive, and the religious voters who make up such a sizable part of the majority?
Well, this is politics, of course, and one doesn't know these people's hearts. But one thing that I thought was strikingly different in Boehner's remarks, anyhow, was how he didn't seem to be using religion. Now, of course, that's a complicated question, because just talking about it in the political field, I suppose, could be considered that. But in the past, especially in this last Congress, from the Catholics in the White House and the administration and the Democratic Party, we saw Catholics almost using their religion to almost
advance agenda,
to endorse agendas,
contrary to the teachings of the church, many times,
and denying it was contrary to the teaching of the Catholic Church. Everyone remembers Nancy Pelosi's gospel during the Democratic version of the gospel during the Democratic Convention. It is as your viewers well know, it's no accident that Kathleen Sebelius and Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi were very prominent in the healthcare debate, and are, of course,
all
Catholics. But what you saw, I thought, and we'll see in the coming months, from John Boehner might have been something different, because he wasn't looking to redefine anything. He went to Lent. Who wants to talk about Lent? Usually during Lent, you sort of want
on your big ascension, your big moment that you've been waiting for.
He was penitential. It was like this penitential raid on Capitol Hill.
Yeah.
And I don't know. It would have to be a very cynical politician who's misusing Good Friday. But
did you see it as a bit of a commentary on the last Catholic speaker?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that the way he did that was the subtlest, most humble way that somebody could have, a Catholic, frankly, could have repudiated what had become before, because it really was an incredible scandal, as your viewers well know, and you've discussed at length. Particularly the Catholic angle and the Catholic Health Association, all that. It also not only the healthcare debate and the last Congress, this whole last political season, the presidential election, and we're the ones we have been waiting for. Well, no, as he said in the clip that you just ran, we're not the end all and be all.
We're the keeper for the moment of this, and then it'll pass to somebody else. That's a good mindset, I think, to go into all this. Let's talk about that agenda. First off, and they've been talking about this for weeks, they're going to have this vote to repeal health care on, January 11th now?
Next Wednesday.
Why? Why have it when you've got a Senate that will likely block it and a president who will never sign a repeal of the bill he practically died trying to get over the line?
Because it has to be repealed. It's an unsustainable piece of legislation. Democrats today were, as Boehner was continuing to make clear that they're going to vote to repeal this bill, Democrats were saying, well, no, because it helps jobs and you're going to hurt jobs. No, the health. Go talk to small business owners who are watching your show right now. Who the uncertainty of the health care bill makes their businesses impossible to sustain. The new fees, the new regulations. This is hurting jobs. So anyway, obviously they're not going to repeal it next week. But what they can do, first of all, the end goal is repeal. This is not just symbolic. The end goal is repeal. So you have the repeal vote. You make clear that you're not dropping this, and then you start shooting arrows at it. You start aiming at specific features of it.
Well,
try to cut off funding. Try to make it almost impossible. It already is impossible to implement. It's this massive bureaucracy that it's not possible to sustain. And of course, it's not paid for.
Right.
We passed this legislation without paying for it sufficiently. So hopefully there'll be. The hope is that you'll start to create. First of all, start cutting off some of the lifelines to this legislation, but then also create this environment where Democrats are not going to want to run on, well, we're for this bad legislation.
Yeah, we're for this
that's
terrible
impossible.
bill that just
this
raised your
impossible
rates.
bill that's making your lives impossible and continuing to hurt the economy.
Well, the LA Times today had the piece about 30% increase Blue Cross Blue Shield in individual rates. How can people sustain this?
Right.
I mean, they won't be. It is going to drive everybody out of private health care, and it's going to create massive dislocations in the private sector.
And people who want to keep Obamacare point to some polls that suggest specific parts of the plan are popular.
Right.
But the whole plan, the whole legislation still isn't. Again, for the uncertainty that it creates and the hardship that it creates to the economy.
And lest we forget, the lack of conscience clauses in this bill, as well as funding of abortion via these pools and these cooperatives.
And we're still finding out what exactly, as we watch Catholics at the Healthcare Summit tell us that abortion was not part of it. We've been finding out.
Sister Carol Keehan and company.
Right, exactly. And one thing that the House Republicans pledged in their Pledge to America was a very important thing that they haven't gotten enough credit for, is to make the Hyde Amendment permanent and universal. The Hyde Amendment.
That's going to be my next question.
Okay. The Hyde Amendment prohibits federal funding of abortion, but only in, which this is lost on a lot of people, only in one, in the labor HHS appropriations bill. Of course, once one says that, you sort of gloss over labor HHS. The government funding of the Labor Department and the Department of Health and Human Services. So there is no universal ban on federal funding of abortion. It's also not permanent. There's a debate over it every year. Exactly. So there's a bipartisan effort. Dan Lipinski, a Democrat from Illinois, who's been on this show,
and Chris Smith
co-sponsors it with Republican from New Jersey.
So is that the same piece of legislation, the extension of the Hyde Amendment and the what are they calling it? They're calling it the No Taxpayer Funding of Abortion Act. Is that the same bill?
That's the same bill.
It's the same bill.
Yeah.
What about Pence's? Mike Pence has another piece of legislation called the Title X Abortion Provider Prohibition Act that will defund Planned Parenthood. People don't realize the millions of dollars that the federal government bestows on Planned Parenthood, the largest provider of abortion in the United States.
I have colleagues who, in the last year, every once in a while, I'll write about this issue. But Planned Parenthood's annual report came out, and we saw that they're a profit-making organization recently. But I have colleagues who have said to me when I've written about this issue, wait a second, we fund Planned Parenthood? I mean, people don't know this. Planned Parenthood doesn't want you to know it, of course. Anyway, Mike Pence has sponsored this before, introduced this before. I think that people are going to be surprised. The abortion industry is going to be shocked because I think this is a Tea Party issue. There's been there's this media myth that the Tea Party is just a fiscal, only concerned about fiscal issues. So you sort of get the impression they might be libertarians. I've gone to Tea Party rallies. There are pro-life signs. There are families who bring their special needs children with them, and this isn't something I saw once.
You see it all the time.
Exactly. And polls bear this out. This is not just my meanderings at Tea Parties. This tends to be a social conservative crowd. Anyway, I think you can get those libertarians on board because why should we be funding Planned Parenthood? Why should we? It's a profit-making industry.
Very quickly, what is the possibility of passage, though, with the Senate and the White House being what it is?
It's plausible that it passes the House. I'm not so sure about the rest.
Unless you attached it to some other bill that needed something.
Right, exactly.
Let's talk briefly. William Daley, former Commerce Secretary under Bill Clinton, now named Chief of Staff for President Obama. a Catholic who's been very critical, we might add, of Cardinal George most recently, back last year when the president spoke at Notre Dame. And he said of Cardinal George at the time, I believe that Cardinal George's stand is an embarrassment to Chicago Catholics and furthers the divide between the church, its members, and the rest of America. The fact is, Catholic Americans are divided over the difficult moral issues of stem cell research and abortion. To imply that the president should not be invited to speak at Notre Dame because he disagrees with the church on these issues is a very narrow view of what constitutes morality. Is that more of the same in the Obama administration?
Yeah, it's absolutely more of the same. And I'm not sure what business Daley had. It's a free country.
On the...
Yeah, it's a free country, but I hope he has more of a sense of the job of the job of the chief of staff than commenting on what Cardinal George has to say about Notre Dame's decision. But yeah, it sadly is more of the same. It doesn't surprise anyone. The funniest bit of don't believe what you read in the Associated Press. Go to Raymond Arroyo's show on our website for your news. The Associated Press today, introducing Daley as chief of staff, calls him an outsider to Washington.
What?
His Commerce Secretary, J.P. Morgan.
And he has the last name Daley.
Yeah.
I mean...
There's that, too.
Yeah, there's that, too. I want to cut to something. You wrote a fantastic piece over the Christmas break. MTV aired something called No Easy Decision. And it was an offshoot of the show 16 and Pregnant, young girls struggling with their pregnancies. Most of the time, and I've been kind of surprised, these girls decide to go through with the child, and you see them struggling with the baby, but they welcome the baby. That wasn't planned, but they welcome it, find a place for it in their lives. In this program, it's a poor young lady who decides to abort the child. I want to show you a little clip of this, and then we'll talk about it. Listen closely to this. She's recounting here her experience at the abortion clinic. She decided to have an abortion. This is after the procedure. Take a listen.
I was 6 weeks pregnant. Everybody was nice. Everybody was gentle with me. The counselor that we talked with, I asked if she could be in the room with me. So they let her be in the room with me as my nurse. She said, don't think of it as 10 fingers and 10 toes with a forehead and all that stuff, because if you think of it like that, you're going to make yourself depressed. Think of it as what it is. Nothing but a little ball of cells. Which is true. You don't get it. You just don't get it.
I'm trying to help me get it then.
You will never feel my pain. You weren't the one in the surgery room. I was there. A thing can turn out like that. That's what I remember. A thing can turn out just like that. Nothing but a bunch of cells can be her.
Tragic. I mean, it's tragic, awful television.
I've seen this twice. I just got chills again listening to her. You see, the amazing part about this program was they have Dr. Drew Pinsky on at the end and beginning and end, I think. And he's the framing makes clear that they're trying to make abortion okay and everyone comfortable with it. And but the girl didn't have the talking points.
No.
Earlier in the show, before this segment you just aired, she was talking about whether or not she would have the abortion.
Right.
She, by the way, was on 16 and pregnant, had the child, and now found herself pregnant again, which is not a rare occurrence. So now she, not a lot of money, boyfriend, not married, doesn't have a great job. So it's hard. It's hard.
It's a terrible situation.
And so anyway, she says that I already love this baby, and he's just making me sick, I think was the comment.
Right.
Meaning she hasn't seen an ultrasound and et cetera. Even though I think MTV was just trying to make us all more comfortable with our freedom of choice, it actually was sort of an expose on the abortion industry.
Yeah.
It wasn't until she went into the abortion clinic, as she relayed there, that she got these talking points that I'm not supposed to think of the forehead and the hands and the feet because
it's just a little ball of cells.
Right. And there was an interesting segment at the end. There was a panel discussion.
Yeah, Drew Pinsky is brought in to kind of who's the sex expert and the doctor on rehab. I mean, he's kind of the Dr. Oz of the youth set.
Right.
And he's the voice of reason, the professional. And he talks about girls, you have to get, an appropriate effective contraceptive.
Right.
He classifies and describes abortion as a parenting decision.
Well, one of the girls introduced that language actually, and then he picked up on it
later,
which was so striking, because one of the girls said, who had an abortion, I believe 21 at this point, says that people think, and she actually does this, people think that we're trying to deny that it's a baby. No, we're not. This was the best parenting decision for our child. They know it's a child. And yet they're being told that it's responsible somehow to make this choice. But they don't want to make it. And then MTV and Dr. Drew are telling them, and the abortion counselor who's in the room with her are telling them, everything you just did is okay, and you shouldn't hurt. Well, you saw in the car she was hurt. She talked about pain.
An emotional wreck, yeah.
I mean, and it really, I think we're seeing this in the culture, and we're seeing this in politics right now. All these new there's 70% more pro-life women in the House now than there were in the 111th Congress. You have the Sarah Palin phenomena, and just whatever you think of her, the media no longer can ignore that majority of American women are not pro-choice radicals like Washington would previously have you to believe. And you're seeing it in the culture. And even MTV, which is trying to continue to feed this message of the message of the sexual revolution, can't sustain that message anymore.
Well, you see the human wreckage all around.
Exactly.
And that's what's, I mean, if I'm telling you I'm making a culinary decision and then I decide to go starve myself in the other room, that's not a culinary decision. You're not eating. And that's why to call this a parenting decision is so, again, it's that duplicitous language that's used to I think, con these poor girls in a terrible situation.
It's so Orwellian, but the curtain is coming off here.
Well, thanks for ripping it back for us, Kathryn Lopez.
Thank you, Raymond.
As always. You can find Kathryn's columns by logging on to National Review online at nationalreview.com. And that's all the time we have. But until next week, you can find updates and the occasional commentary by following me on Twitter at twitter.com/Raymond Arroyo, or on my Facebook fan page. And I recently produced the only Catholic fully dramatized word-for-word audio Bible available anywhere. It was a huge hit at Christmas, but we're still out there. It's called The Truth and Life Dramatized Audio Bible. Michael York, Brian Cox, Blair Underwood, and other incredible actors bring the scriptures to life as never before. Go to RaymondArroyo.com for more information. Click on the banner at the top of the home site for ordering information. Until next week, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, I'm Raymond Arroyo. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye now.